Hey, I'm back with another meta report. We've got some Pixelborn data and some paper data to look at with some surprise winning lists from a recent tournament. I'll show example deck lists as we go, but if you'd like to see more decks from top players or tournaments, I'll link the Lorcana meta subreddit below, where we have a pinned thread with top player profiles and example deck lists. Getting into the Pixelborn data, let's refresh with what last week looked like. I remember saying it was a good sign for a healthy meta when the other category had the most played games, signaling either we had a good environment to test new decks in, or that the top two should be played more to take advantage of people being adventurous. Now to this week's data, and that's what happened. Amber Steel has retaken its throne over the others with an over 30% share of the meta. Ruby Amethyst grew as well, and you are back to expecting over half of your matches to be against these two decks. So when we look at win rates, we're evaluating a positive win rate against these two a lot heavier than against the rest, especially with how quickly representation declines. Amber Sapphire did have a better win rate after looking rough last week. Amethyst Emerald looks here to stay, and Amber Emerald finishes the top 5. Now to the matchup spreads, starting with number 1. I'll be giving example lists from reputable players, but remember, the data doesn't reflect one archetype, it just accounts for any deck using Amber and Steel. It's kinda scary how well Amber Steel looks this week. It jumped up in meta share, and it doesn't show any really unfavorable matchups in the top 5, outside of that slight disadvantage against Amber Emerald. I think we're getting close to a settled hybrid list, still abusing a whole new world, but not trying to push early points with Lilo. This isn't a healthy statement, but looking at this data, I don't see a compelling reason to climb ladder with any other deck right now. We have some off-meta picks later, but let's move on to number 2. Ruby Amethyst was looking so good last week. I think the main drop we're seeing is Amber Steel Hybrid running rampant, and Amethyst Emerald is a real struggle for control. Keep track of what top players are doing to adapt. I'm sure many new players will abandon ship in this meta, but the deck is still great and capable of making changes to keep its place here. We see Elrathion is slimming down the curve with Pongos, Goofies, and even Jafar in there. On to the third spot with Amber Sapphire. I think the data finally lines up with what I'd expect from the best fair deck in the meta. It struggles against the wide boards Amber Steel can make, but has a strong matchup spread the rest of the way. I'm showing Jeebus' list as he updates his pretty regularly. My take on this deck is still the same. It rewards type play, but requires a good understanding of tempo and when to switch between roles in a game. In fourth place is Amethyst Emerald again. The data is a little rough, but I still think a lot of newer players are favoring the deck on Pixelborn in an effort to get better with it for paper events. There's two big things going for the deck. It's budget friendly and it has a good matchup against control. Budget isn't a concern for Pixelborn, but it still has an influence on what deck you want to get good with for players playing both digitally and at tournaments. And we all hate losing to control. Fifth spot was taken back by Amber Emerald as more people are playing with Cusco than Bell. The data looks pretty fine for the deck. I'm surprised though, I cannot find a recent topping deck list to tie to this data. The most popular list on Dreamborn is Steadfast, so I have to assume this is where most players are starting from. We do have a paper list we'll look at later from a top 8 that's split, and I think the real question is, are you running just in time or not? Last week I said the data looked good for the deck, but this week the matchup win rates switched, so it looks like some refining can be done to make this ink pair a real contender. Let me know down below what you've been running, and if you feel like this data is in line with your experience with the deck. Alright, now I'll go through the rest of top 8 a little faster. Sapphire Steel got knocked down, but has some wild win rates there this week. I think the deck can be built to attack this meta very efficiently, but it needs some refining. Amethyst Sapphire is looking good again this week, but the data isn't where I would expect it to be. There is a lot of ways the deck can be built though. I had a lot of fun digging into this deck last week and would still recommend it as a strong off-meta option. My anecdotal experience would give this deck a lot higher win rate against control, but all my lists are running a full broom package. On to Emerald Steel, looking a little all over this week. Ironically, there's an easier time finding a good list for this deck as its paper representation is higher, but it doesn't do as well in a best of one environment. 9th place goes to Amber Amethyst, but it just keeps looking worse every week. I'd be higher on the deck because of its win rate against the top deck, but it needs to do more against the rest of the meta. Emerald Sapphire finishes the top 10 and boasts a high win rate this week. I had to check last week's numbers to see if there's a pattern, and yeah, honestly, the deck looks underplayed with a win rate that high. I might have to just follow the data on this deck this week. Now for the last 5 to round out the top 15. The win percent can look really good here, but there's so little data to really give credibility to these results. Still, it's fun to look at someone having a great week with Ruby Sapphire, and maybe Amber Ruby should see more representation than it's getting. I do think it has a good matchup into the mid-range meta, but it does struggle against control. Alright, that's it for the Pixelborn data. Now onto the paper meta. We didn't get any big events to talk about, but we did see some interesting lists worth mentioning. First, I've broken down the top 8 meta from the last 6 events, weighted for placements whenever top 8 wasn't split. We can see a similar trend to our Pixelborn data with Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst leading, but I mentioned earlier that Amethyst Emerald is here to stay and it's making a bigger impact in paper than on Pixelborn. The deck is affordable and it's good. I expect it to be well represented in paper events. As for interesting lists, we had an Amber Steel Musketeer list in the top 8 of a recent event. No aerial, no whole new world, no stitches, all you need is to grab your sword and all the musketeers you can fit in a deck. Maybe we can add musketeers to our list of Amber Steel archetypes to choose between when reading the data. Well done, I love to see it. My guy Robert out there top 8ing with Amber Ruby. Nice. And here we have the most recent top 8 list I can reference for Amber Emerald. I'm really curious what lists people are having success with for this deck. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll link my Discord in the description below as another great resource for seeing meta information as we get it. I'm always there to hang out and chat or answer questions, and I'd love to hear what content you'd like to see in the future. That's all for me. Have a magical day.